This shouldn't work. A hole in the ground, no electricity, no ice, no machine. And yet, food inside stays cold. Not just cool. Actually cold. Cold enough to slow spoilage. Cold enough to last longer than it should. So what's going on here? Because this goes against everything people believe about refrigeration. No power means no cooling. Right? That's what we've been taught. If you want to keep food fresh, you need a fridge, a system, a constant energy supply. But what if that's not entirely true? What if the ground itself is already doing the job? Because this isn't a trick. It's something that has been used for a very long time. Long before modern refrigerators existed, people stored food underground, not because they had no choice, but because it actually worked. So why don't you see this method anymore? Why isn't it common knowledge? Because it feels too simple, too primitive, and most people assume simple means ineffective. But that assumption is wrong, very wrong, because the ground isn't just dirt, it's a natural temperature regulator. And once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. But before we explain it, let's test it. Same environment, same day, same temperature outside. On one side, food left in open air. On the other, food placed inside a simple hole in the ground. No special tools, no advanced setup, just depth and coverage. Now wait, because this isn't instant. And that's where most people make their first mistake. They expect results too quickly. But this method doesn't work on speed. It works on stability. Because above ground, temperature keeps changing. Sunlight heats everything. Air moves. Heat builds up, then drops. Constant fluctuation. But below the surface, things are different. Very different. A few inches down, temperature starts to stabilize. Go deeper. It becomes even more consistent, less affected by sunlight, less affected by air, less affected by sudden changes. And that's the key. Because cooling isn't always about making something cold instantly. Sometimes, it's about preventing it from getting hot in the first place. And that's exactly what this method does. It blocks heat, slows it down, keeps the internal temperature lower than the outside. Not freezing, but controlled. And control is everything. Now come back to the test. After some time, check both sides. The food left outside, warmer, closer to the surrounding air, starting to lose freshness. But the one inside the ground, notice the difference. It hasn't heated up the same way. It feels cooler, more stable, less affected. And that's not luck. That's physics. But here's where most people go wrong. They see this and assume digging any hole will work. That's not true. Because just like the charcoal filter, the method matters a lot. Depth matters, location matters, airflow matters. And if you get these wrong, the entire system fails. So the real question is, what makes this actually work? And more importantly, how do you do it the right way? Because once you understand that, this stops being a simple hole and starts becoming a system. So if a random hole isn't enough, what actually works? The answer is simple. Structure. Because this method is not about digging. It's about controlling heat. And that only happens when everything is set up correctly. So let's build it the right way. Start with location. This is where most people fail first. They dig anywhere, under direct sunlight on dry, exposed ground, and then wonder why it doesn't work. But sunlight is your biggest enemy here, because if the ground is constantly heated from above, the cooling effect disappears. So you need shade. Natural shade is best, under a tree, next to a structure. Anywhere the sun doesn't directly hit for long periods. Now move to depth. This is critical. Too shallow, and temperature still fluctuates. Too deep, and airflow becomes a problem. There's a balance, a point where the ground is stable but still usable, because you're not trying to go underground completely. You're trying to reach the zone where temperature stays consistent. That's where the cooling happens. Now here's something most people completely ignore. Airflow. It sounds wrong at first, because you think sealing everything would keep it cooler. But without airflow, moisture builds up, heat gets trapped, and food spoils faster. So instead of sealing it completely, you control the air. Small openings, just enough for slow movement, not enough to let heat rush in. This is where the system starts to form. Not just a hole, but a controlled environment. Now let's talk about insulation, because dirt alone isn't enough. You need a barrier between the food and the ground, cloth, leaves, wood, anything that reduces direct contact. Because direct contact can transfer moisture and ruin what you're trying to preserve. So you create layers, ground, insulation, food, cover, each one with a purpose, each one affecting the final result. Now cover it properly. This is where most setups fail. They leave it partially open. Or cover it with something thin, and that allows heat to enter. Instead, use something solid, wood, a flat stone, even a thick layer of packed soil. The goal is simple: block heat from above and maintain the internal temperature. Now watch what happens when all of this comes together. Same environment, same outside temperature, but this time, the system is built correctly. Hours pass, heat rises outside, the air gets warmer. But inside, temperature barely changes. Slow, stable, controlled. Now check the food, touch it, compare it, the difference is clear. Outside, warm. Inside, noticeably cooler. Not cold like a refrigerator, but cold enough to slow down spoilage. And that's the entire point, because this method isn't about freezing food. It's about extending time, giving you more hours, more usability, more survival margin, and in the right conditions. That difference becomes critical. Now here's something important. This method works best in certain environments, cooler climates, shaded areas, places where the ground temperature stays lower than the air. If you try this in extreme heat, on dry, sun-exposed land, results will drop. Not because the method is wrong, but because conditions matter. And that's something most videos never tell you. They show the result, but ignore the environment, which leads to failure. But when used correctly, this becomes a powerful backup system. No electricity, no moving parts, nothing to break, just knowledge, applied correctly. And that's what makes it valuable, because modern systems are convenient, but they're also dependent. Power goes out, and everything stops. But this keeps working quietly, consistently in the background. Now think about that. A simple hole. Replacing something people think requires electricity, not perfectly, but effectively enough to matter. So why isn't this widely used? Because it doesn't fit modern expectations. It's not instant. It's not perfect, and it requires understanding. But in survival, those are not weaknesses, they're strengths, because they give you options. And survival is never about one perfect solution. It's about having multiple ways to solve the same problem. And this is one of the most overlooked ones. So the next time you think about keeping food cold, remember this. Cooling doesn't always come from machines. Sometimes it comes from the ground beneath you.